Beyond the Dome. Chapter 4. Convergence. On their third day at Nexus Point, Ash woke to the sound of alarms echoing through the settlement. The urgent, pulsing tone was unmistakable, a security alert. He was out of bed instantly, years of Harvester emergency training overriding the disorientation of awakening in unfamiliar surroundings. Elias and Riya were already moving, pulling on the modified environmental gear the Coalition had provided for their transition period. Lighter than Harvester suits, but still offering protection against wasteland toxicity for their unmodified biology. "Proximity alert," a voice announced through the settlement's communication system. "Multiple dome vehicles approaching from the southeast. All residents implement Security Protocol 3. Transition visitors report to Central Command immediately." They exchanged tense glances, the implication clear. Eden 9 forces had located Nexus Point. Whether through tracking their extraction or independent intelligence gathering remained unknown. Either way, the confrontation Vega had predicted was arriving sooner than anticipated. "They found us," Riya said unnecessarily, securing her respirator. "Or found the settlement at least." "We need to reach Central Command," Ash replied, checking his gear with practiced efficiency. "We might have information that could help manage this situation." They exited their quarters to find the transition section already buzzing with controlled activity. Coalition members moved with practiced precision, implementing what was clearly a well-rehearsed security protocol. Unlike the panicked responses such an alert might trigger in Eden 9, the adapted community displayed disciplined preparation, not their first experience with dome security threats. Sarah met them in the corridor, her expression tense but composed. "This way," she directed, leading them toward the Central Command facility. "Commander Vega needs your input on Eden 9 tactical patterns." As they moved through the settlement, they observed Coalition members securing sensitive equipment, activating defensive systems, and moving children and vulnerable individuals to protected interior spaces. The response demonstrated both preparation for potential conflict and determination to avoid it if possible. Central Command occupied a reinforced structure near the heart of Nexus Point, partially embedded in the canyon wall for natural protection. Inside, Commander Vega stood before a tactical display showing multiple approaching vehicles, the distinctive silhouettes of Eden 9 security transports, larger and more heavily armed than standard Harvester rovers. "Director Kane is leading personally," Vega noted as they entered, gesturing toward the display. 12 vehicles, approximately 60 personnel based on thermal signatures. "Standard dome security configuration or something more aggressive?" Ash studied the formation, his Harvester tactical training automatically analyzing the approach pattern. "More aggressive than standard. That's a Class 1 security deployment, the highest threat response Eden 9 authorizes for external operations. They've designated this as a critical containment scenario." "Not surprising, given what's at stake," Vega replied grimly. "Dr. Reeves, her research, 3 defected Harvesters, and evidence of adapted human settlements. Everything that threatens their control narrative in one location." The tactical display updated as Coalition monitoring systems tracked the approaching dome forces. They were still approximately 20 kilometers out, but moving with purposeful speed through the difficult terrain. "They're following our evacuation route from the research facility," Elias observed, studying the approach vector. "They must have managed to track our vehicles despite the storm interference. Or they had contingency surveillance we didn't detect," Riya suggested, her communications expertise offering alternative analysis. "Satellite monitoring that activated after the storm cleared." Vega turned to face them directly. "Regardless of how they found us, we need to determine the appropriate response. Coalition protocol prioritizes defense without escalation, but Kane's force composition suggests he's prepared for significant conflict." "What are your defensive capabilities?" Ash asked, professionally assessing the tactical situation despite his uncertain position between the opposing forces. "Limited compared to dome military resources," Vega acknowledged candidly. "We maintain perimeter security systems, short-range defensive weapons, and emergency evacuation protocols. Our primary strategy has always been concealment rather than confrontation. When detection occurs, we typically evacuate rather than engage." "Is evacuation an option now?" Elias asked, noting the size of the settlement and the complexity of its established infrastructure. Not for the entire community, Vega replied. Essential personnel and critical research assets could be evacuated via our emergency tunnels, but most of Nexus Point's population and infrastructure would remain vulnerable. The situation presented a critical tactical dilemma. Eden 9's forces significantly outgunned the Coalition's defensive capabilities, yet the settlement represented too substantial an investment of resources and infrastructure to simply abandon. Direct confrontation would likely lead to Coalition casualties and potential destruction of the community, while complete surrender would deliver Dr. Reeves and her research back into Eden 9's control, perpetuating the suppression of adaptation knowledge for another generation. We need a third option, Ash stated, his tactical mind searching for alternatives beyond the binary choices of fight or flight. Something that changes the engagement parameters before Kane's forces arrive. Such as? Vega prompted, clearly open to suggestions despite her command authority. Communication, Ash proposed. Direct dialogue with Kane, but from a position that complicates his tactical calculations rather than simply opposing them. He won't negotiate, Riya interjected. Priority Omega protocols authorize unlimited resource commitment to containment objectives. He can't return to Eden 9 having discovered an adapted settlement without either neutralizing it or confirming its elimination. True, Ash acknowledged. But we can change what containment means in this context by altering the information dynamics. He turned to Vega. Does the Coalition have broadcast capabilities that could reach Eden 9 directly? Not just Kane's forces, but the Dome population. Vega's expression shifted as she grasped the implications. Limited capabilities. We've developed communication systems that could potentially penetrate Dome information barriers, but we've never deployed them. Such a revelation without preparation could trigger dangerous instability within the Dome. But the threat of such revelation changes Kane's tactical calculation, Ash explained. If containment has already failed, if adaptation information is already transmitting to Eden 9's population, then destroying Nexus Point accomplishes nothing from a security perspective. Elias caught the strategy immediately. A tactical bluff. Make Kane believe the information he's trying to contain is already spreading beyond his control. Not entirely a bluff, Ash clarified. Prepare actual transmission capabilities and have minimal adaptation information ready for broadcast. The goal isn't immediate full disclosure to Dome populations, but creating sufficient credible threat to force Kane into dialogue rather than direct assault. Vega considered the strategy, her tactical mind clearly evaluating its potential effectiveness. Risky. If Kane believes containment has already failed, he might decide to eliminate witnesses rather than negotiate. He might, Ash acknowledged. But it also opens possibilities for de-escalation that don't currently exist. And there's another factor. Kane's Dome security forces haven't been cleared for the full truth about adaptation. Most believe they're pursuing dangerous wasteland scavengers who kidnapped harvesters and stole valuable research. If they witness a thriving adapted settlement with their own eyes, information containment becomes more difficult within his own forces, Vega finished, nodding slowly. Creating potential leverage. The tactical display updated again, showing Kane's forces now 15 kilometers from Nexus Point and continuing their approach. Time for decision was running short. Prepare the broadcast capability, Vega decided, and assemble our negotiation team. She turned to Ash, Elias, and Riya. I want all three of you present. Your status as former Eden 9 harvesters who chose to defect adds complexity to Kane's containment narrative. As Coalition personnel moved to implement the strategy, Dr. Reeves entered the command center, her expression determined despite the tension surrounding her. I should be part of any negotiation, she stated firmly. I'm the primary objective of their containment effort. Agreed, Vega replied. But your safety remains our highest priority. If negotiations fail, you'll need to evacuate immediately with the critical research data. The next hour passed in controlled urgency as the Coalition prepared both defensive measures and negotiation strategies. Ash, Elias, and Riya contributed their knowledge of Eden 9 tactical procedures and Dome psychology, helping design an approach that might penetrate the containment mindset that would be driving Kane's decisions. When the Eden 9 forces reached the 5-kilometer perimeter around Nexus Point, Vega activated the first phase of their strategy, a communication directed specifically to Director Kane's command vehicle on Eden 9's secure frequency, a capability that itself would unsettle the Director, demonstrating Coalition technological sophistication beyond what Dome intelligence had assessed. Director Kane, this is Commander Vega of the Adaptation Coalition. We're aware of your approach and tactical configuration. I'm requesting direct communication before your forces advance further toward Nexus Point. There was a pause before Kane's response came through, his voice tight with controlled anger. This is Director Kane. You're holding Eden 9 personnel and classified research materials unlawfully obtained from a Dome facility. Return them immediately, and your settlement will not be harmed. The standard containment approach, framing the situation as a simple recovery operation rather than acknowledging the broader implications of an adapted human settlement. Vega had anticipated this opening position. We both know this situation extends beyond personnel recovery, Director, she replied calmly. Nexus Point represents one of 14 established Adaptation Coalition settlements across the former North American continent, with a combined population exceeding 20,000 adapted humans. Your Harvester team chose to join us voluntarily after learning the truth Eden 9 has concealed for generations. Another pause, longer this time, as Kane processed this direct challenge to the containment narrative. When his response came, his voice had hardened further. Commander, you're harboring Eden 9 citizens who accessed restricted information without authorization. Whatever claims you're making about adapted humans and suppressed information are irrelevant to this recovery operation. You have 30 minutes to return our personnel and research materials before we take direct action. Vega nodded to a Coalition communications specialist who activated the second phase of their strategy, a directed narrowband transmission toward Eden 9 itself, carefully calibrated to penetrate the Dome's communication barriers without immediately triggering security countermeasures. Director, Vega responded, I should inform you that we've initiated information transmission to Eden 9's general population regarding adaptation possibilities and the existence of thriving human communities outside the domes. Destroying Nexus Point won't contain this information now. This time, the pause extended nearly a minute. Kane likely consulting with his security team about the transmission claim and potential response options. The tactical display showed his forces halted at the 5-kilometer perimeter, neither advancing nor withdrawing while the Director assessed this new development. You're bluffing, Kane finally responded. Eden 9's communication security prevents unauthorized external transmission to the general population. The same communication security your technical division assured you would prevent Harvester teams from learning about adaptation possibilities? Vega countered smoothly. Technology evolves, Director. The Coalition has had generations to develop countermeasures to Dome information barriers. To emphasize the point, she nodded to the communications specialist again, who strengthened the transmission signal toward Eden 9. Still containing only minimal adaptation information but sufficient to register on Dome security monitoring systems. Director, Vega continued, we're proposing a different approach. Rather than conflict that serves neither of our populations, I invite you to send a small team, including yourself if you wish, to Nexus Point under protected status. See the reality of adaptation for yourself before making irreversible decisions. The tactical gambit was clear, offering Kane a face-saving alternative to either immediate assault or retreat, while potentially exposing his security team to evidence that would complicate the containment narrative even within Dome forces. The communication channel remained silent for several tense minutes as Kane presumably weighed his options. The tactical display showed subtle repositioning among the Eden 9 vehicles, security teams adapting to the unexpected development and preparing for multiple contingencies. Finally, Kane's response came through. I will meet with you personally, accompanied by a security detail of 6 officers. Any hostile action will trigger immediate response from our remaining forces. Coordinates for the meeting point? A neutral location 1 kilometer south of our settlement perimeter, Vega replied, transmitting specific coordinates. We'll meet you there in 30 minutes with an equivalent team. Your Harvester personnel will be present to confirm their status voluntarily. After confirming the arrangements, Vega turned to Ash, Elias, and Riya. This is a critical juncture. Your presence at this meeting serves multiple purposes, demonstrating to Kane that you've chosen the coalition willingly, while potentially influencing his security team with evidence of Dome citizens who've accepted adaptation truths without the Chaos Dome leadership fears. He'll still attempt to recover us and Dr. Reeves, Ash warned. This meeting only buys time and creates witnesses within his security team. It doesn't resolve the fundamental conflict. True, Vega acknowledged. But changing the conflict parameters, making it about information and choice rather than containment and control, creates possibilities that didn't exist before. And time itself serves our interests more than Eden 9's in this situation. The longer containment remains incomplete, the more challenging Kane's position becomes. As they prepared for the confrontation, selecting the coalition team members and establishing security protocols for the meeting, Ash found himself in the unprecedented position of strategizing against the Dome society he had served his entire life. Yet his Harvester training, analyzing situations, assessing risks, identifying leverage points, transferred smoothly to this new context. "We should establish clear communication protocols," he suggested to Vega as they finalized preparations. "If Kane attempts to recover us by force during the meeting, or if negotiations break down completely." "Already arranged," she confirmed, showing him a small communication device disguised within their environmental gear. "Emergency signal triggers immediate response from our security team, but our goal remains de-escalation rather than conflict." The meeting team assembled. Commander Vega, Dr. Reeves, Ash, Elias, Riya, and 3 coalition security specialists with advanced adaptation enabling them to function effectively in wasteland conditions with minimal protective gear. Their visual appearance itself would communicate a message to Kane's security team. Humans thriving in supposedly lethal external conditions, the living embodiment of possibilities Dome citizens had been told were impossible. They departed Nexus Point in 2 vehicles, following a careful route toward the designated meeting coordinates. Behind them, the coalition settlement continued emergency preparations. Defensive systems activated, evacuation protocols for vulnerable residents initiated, critical research and resources secured for potential rapid transport if negotiations failed. The meeting location was a relatively flat area with limited natural cover, selected deliberately to reduce tactical advantages for either side and emphasize the diplomatic rather than military nature of the encounter. As they approached, Eden 9's vehicles became visible on the horizon, the distinctive profile of Dome security transports unmistakable even at distance. "Remember," Vega instructed as they took position and awaited Kane's arrival, "our goal is controlled revelation, not confrontation. We want his security team to witness enough to complicate the containment narrative, without triggering immediate defensive reactions." Minutes later, the Eden 9 vehicles arrived, 1 primary transport and 2 security escorts. They halted approximately 50 meters away, maintaining tactical distance while establishing visual contact. After a brief delay, the main transport's hatch opened, and Director Kane emerged, accompanied by 6 security officers in full Dome environmental protection suits. The contrast between the 2 groups was immediately striking. While Kane and his team wore Eden 9's comprehensive environmental gear, fully enclosed suits with integrated life support and weapon systems, the coalition representatives displayed their adaptation through minimal protection. Vega and her security team wore only light respirators for the current atmospheric conditions, while Ash, Elias, and Riya used the transitional protection suitable for their unmodified biology. Even Dr. Reeves, despite her recent emergence from stasis, wore adaptation-supporting gear rather than full environmental protection, a visible statement about the possibilities Kane's containment protocols sought to suppress. The 2 groups approached each other slowly, stopping at a distance of approximately 10 meters, close enough for direct communication but maintaining sufficient separation for security comfort. Ash noted the body language of Kane's security team, the subtle shifts in posture and weapon positioning that indicated confusion and uncertainty at the sight of humans surviving in wasteland conditions with minimal protection. "Director Kane," Vega greeted formally, "thank you for agreeing to this meeting." Kane's expression was impossible to read behind his environmental suit's visor, but his voice through the external speaker carried unmistakable tension. "Commander Vega, I'm here to negotiate the return of Eden 9 personnel and research materials, nothing more." "Of course," Vega replied with deliberate calm, "though I believe the personnel in question should speak for themselves regarding their current status and intentions." She gestured toward Ash, Elias, and Riya, who stepped forward as planned. Ash took the lead, addressing his former director directly. "Director Kane, we weren't kidnapped or coerced. We chose to remain with the Coalition after learning that Eden 9 has deliberately suppressed information about adaptation possibilities for generations. We've witnessed a thriving human community adapted to wasteland conditions, a possibility Dome citizens have been told is scientifically impossible." Kane's posture stiffened. "Harvester Tanner, you accessed classified information without authorization and abandoned your post during a priority Omega operation. Whatever conclusions you've drawn from incomplete information are irrelevant to your duty to Eden 9. "The information wasn't incomplete," Elias interjected, stepping forward beside Ash. "It was deliberately falsified. I've reviewed the Coalition's adaptation research as a trained Dome scientist. The technology is legitimate, Director. Humans can adapt to external conditions through controlled genetic modification, a possibility Eden 9 leadership has known about and suppressed since shortly after the collapse." Kane's attention shifted to Dr. Reeves, who had remained slightly behind Vega until this point. "Dr. Reeves," he acknowledged, his tone shifting to something more complex than simple authority. "Your research was supposed to remain secured until proper evaluation protocols could be established. You understand the potential societal disruption uncontrolled adaptation information could cause within the domes." Dr. Reeves stepped forward, her gaze steady despite the tension surrounding them. "What I understand, Director, is that adaptation research was suppressed not for public safety, but for power preservation. The domes were designed as temporary shelters while adaptation developed, not permanent controlled environments for perpetual human containment." The exchange continued for several minutes, each side presenting their fundamental position, Kane insisting on the return of Dome personnel and research for proper evaluation within Eden 9. The Coalition representatives maintaining that adaptation knowledge represented legitimate human possibilities that shouldn't remain suppressed for political convenience. Throughout, Ash observed Kane's security team carefully, noting their reactions to the Coalition's revelations. Several displayed subtle signs of uncertainty, shifting postures, exchanged glances, slight adjustments in weapon positioning. The containment narrative they'd likely been given about dangerous wasteland scavengers was visibly conflicting with the reality before them. Articulate, technically knowledgeable adapted humans discussing scientific research rather than threatening aggression. "Director," Vega said eventually, shifting the conversation toward potential resolution. "Continuing information suppression becomes increasingly untenable as adaptation communities grow and Dome wasteland interactions increase. What we're proposing isn't immediate public disclosure, but controlled transition, a process for gradually introducing adaptation possibilities to Dome populations without triggering the instability you legitimately fear." Kane's response was immediate and firm. "Eden 9's governance structures determine appropriate information release schedules for our citizens, Commander. External forces attempting to influence that process represents an existential security threat we cannot accept. Even when those governance structures have deliberately concealed viable human survival alternatives for generations," Vega challenged. "Adaptation doesn't threaten Dome existence. It expands human possibilities beyond Dome limitations. Both approaches can coexist, as they were originally designed to do." The fundamental conflict crystallized in this exchange, not simply about recovered personnel or research, but about who controlled humanity's post-collapse narrative. Dome leadership had maintained power through information control justified by survival necessity. The growing, adapted population inherently challenged that justification by demonstrating alternatives were viable. As the confrontation continued without clear resolution, Ash noticed increasing signs of communication among Kane's security team. Subtle indicators that the containment narrative was fracturing simply through exposure to adapted humans and their compelling counter-evidence. Kane himself must have recognized this development, as his approach suddenly shifted. "This discussion accomplishes nothing," he stated abruptly. "My final offer: return Dr. Reeves and her original research data, and Eden 9 will not take direct action against your settlement. The Harvesters may remain with you if that is their choice." The unexpected concession regarding Ash, Elias, and Riya suggested Kane was recalculating his position based on evolving tactical realities. Perhaps he recognized that forcibly returning Harvesters who could testify about adapted communities represented more risk than benefit to Dome information control. Vega's response was measured. "Dr. Reeves has chosen to remain with the Coalition, Director. Her research belongs to humanity's future, not to Dome control structures that would suppress it. However, we remain open to establishing communication protocols for gradual, controlled sharing of adaptation information with Dome populations." The negotiation had reached its critical impasse, the fundamental question of who would control adaptation knowledge and how it would eventually reach Dome populations. Neither side appeared willing to concede their core position. After a tense silence, Kane activated his suit's private communication system, conferring with someone not present at the meeting, likely Eden 9 leadership receiving remote updates on the situation. When he turned his attention back to the Coalition representatives, his posture had subtly changed, a shift that Ash's Harvester training immediately registered as potentially dangerous. "Since you refuse reasonable terms," Kane stated, his voice hardening, "we have no choice but to—" He was interrupted by an urgent communication from one of his security officers. "Sir, we're detecting multiple approaching vehicles from the north and west, not Coalition signatures." The tactical situation suddenly shifted as both groups became aware of new elements entering the confrontation. Vega quickly accessed her communication device, receiving reports from Nexus Point's monitoring systems. 3 vehicle groups approaching from different vectors, she reported, tension evident beneath her controlled tone. Not Coalition, not Dome signatures either. "Wasteland scavengers," Kane concluded immediately, his security team shifting to defensive positions. "Opportunistic raiders drawn by the unusual concentration of resources." "No," Vega countered, studying the data from Nexus Point's sensors. "These are coordinated approach patterns with sophisticated vehicle signatures. Something else." The mystery was resolved minutes later as the first of the approaching vehicles came into visual range. Large, heavily modified transports bearing markings neither group immediately recognized. They established positions equidistant from both the Coalition and Eden 9 groups, creating a triangular formation around the meeting site. When the lead vehicle's hatch opened, the figure that emerged caused visible reactions from both Vega and Kane. Recognition mixed with evident surprise. "Central Coalition Command," Vega explained quietly to Ash and the others. "Representatives from the unified leadership structure connecting all 14 adaptation settlements. They weren't supposed to be in this region." The Central Coalition representative approached alone, wearing minimal environmental protection that indicated advanced adaptation. An older woman with the distinctive features of third-generation modification, she carried herself with unmistakable authority. "Commander Vega," she acknowledged before turning to Kane. "Director, I'm Administrator Chen of Central Coalition Command. It appears we've all arrived at a significant juncture somewhat ahead of schedule." "Administrator," Vega responded, clearly surprised by the unexpected intervention. "We weren't aware Central Command was monitoring this situation." "We monitor all potential Dome Coalition interactions," Administrator Chen replied matter-of-factly, "particularly those involving Dr. Reeves and her research. When Eden 9 forces mobilized toward Nexus Point, multiple Coalition settlements activated response protocols." She turned her full attention to Kane, whose security team had maintained defensive positioning while assessing the new development. "Director, your tactical options have just narrowed considerably. You're now facing not just Nexus Point, but coordinated Coalition response from multiple settlements. Whatever containment scenario you envisioned is no longer viable." Kane's response was coldly professional. "Administrator, Eden 9 doesn't recognize your authority or your alleged coalition. We're engaged in a security operation to recover Dome personnel and research. Personnel who have chosen to remain with us," Chen countered, "and research that represents humanity's collective future." rather than dome control mechanisms. She gestured toward the surrounding vehicles. But tactical reality often transcends official recognition, Director. You're outnumbered and tactically compromised. More importantly, this confrontation has already failed to maintain information containment. She activated a communication device, displaying what appeared to be transmission data. While you've been negotiating, adapted communities throughout the region have implemented information distribution protocols. Limited but accurate adaptation information is already penetrating dome communication barriers, not just Eden 9, but all 12 remaining domes. The revelation clearly stunned Kane, whose posture betrayed momentary shock before professional control reasserted itself. That constitutes an act of aggression against dome governance, he stated, though his tone lacked the certainty of his earlier pronouncements. We consider it the correction of generations of suppressed human potential, Chen replied simply. The information being transmitted is basic adaptation confirmation. Evidence that humans can survive outside domes through controlled genetic modification. No technical details that might trigger uncontrolled exodus or destabilize dome operations. Just truth that dome citizens deserve to know. The tactical situation had fundamentally transformed. What began as a containment operation against a single coalition settlement had evolved into a coordinated information revelation strategy implemented by the entire adapted human community. Kane's original objective, recovering Dr. Reeves and suppressing adaptation knowledge, was now unachievable, regardless of military action against Nexus Point. Administrator Chen seemed to recognize Kane's tactical recalculation. Director, this confrontation offers an opportunity rather than merely a challenge. You could be remembered as the dome leader who managed peaceful transition rather than the one who fought futilely against inevitable truth. Information containment has failed, not through coalition aggression, but through the natural progression of human development outside dome control. The fundamental choice facing Kane became increasingly clear. Continue pursuing a containment strategy that had already failed, potentially triggering direct conflict with coalition forces, or adapt to the new reality and help shape how adaptation information would reach dome populations. After conferring again with Eden 9 leadership through his secure communication system, Kane turned back to Administrator Chen and Commander Vega. His posture had changed subtly, still formal and authoritative, but with the slight shift that experienced tacticians recognize as acceptance of altered operational parameters. The situation appears to have evolved beyond immediate resolution, he acknowledged with careful neutrality. I propose establishing a formal communication channel between Eden 9 governance and your coalition leadership to address information management moving forward. It wasn't capitulation, but tactical realignment, recognizing that direct conflict would serve neither population's interests when information containment had already failed. Whether this represented genuine adaptation to new realities or merely strategic repositioning remained unclear, but it opened possibilities for peaceful transition that hadn't existed before. A reasonable approach, Administrator Chen agreed. Initial communications can address controlled information release scheduling, transition support for interested dome citizens, and eventual formal recognition protocols between dome and adapted governance structures. The conversation shifted to establishing preliminary communication parameters, with both sides maintaining professional distance while acknowledging the transformed situation. Throughout, Ash observed the interactions with the analytical perspective of his harvester training, noting how quickly seemingly immovable positions could shift when tactical realities changed sufficiently. When the meeting concluded 30 minutes later, the immediate confrontation had been deferred, replaced by scheduled communication between dome and coalition leadership structures. Kane and his security team returned to their vehicles, departing without recovering Dr. Reeves, the research data, or the former harvesters, a tacit acknowledgement that the containment operation had fundamentally failed. As they returned to Nexus Point, Administrator Chen joined the coalition representatives in their transport, her presence bringing both reassurance and new complexities. The Central Coalition Command's intervention had prevented potential conflict, but their independent implementation of information distribution protocols raised questions about coordination and authority within the adapted community itself. You accelerated the revelation timeline, Vega observed once they were underway, her tone careful but carrying clear concern about unilateral action. Necessity dictated acceleration, Chen replied simply. Our monitoring systems detected dome preparations beyond Kane's visible forces, secondary containment teams positioning for potential coalition community neutralization if negotiation failed. The information release serves as both tactical leverage and insurance against extreme dome response. The strategic calculation made sense, though the unilateral implementation suggested tension between local coalition settlement autonomy and centralized command priorities. A governance challenge different from but not entirely unlike those facing the domes. Back at Nexus Point, the immediate crisis atmosphere had transformed to controlled activity as the settlement processed the changed circumstances. Defensive preparations continued, but with reduced urgency. Information systems monitored dome communications for response patterns, and leadership gathered to assess implications of Central Command's intervention. In a secured meeting room within the command center, Administrator Chen outlined the broader strategic context to Vega, Dr. Reeves, and the former harvesters. The confrontation acceleration wasn't ideal but had become inevitable. Our intelligence indicated multiple domes were preparing containment operations against suspected adaptation settlements, using research facility monitoring as cover for expanded wasteland surveillance. How widespread is the information release? Dr. Reeves asked, her scientific mind immediately focusing on potential societal impact within dome populations. Controlled and gradual, Chen assured her. Phase 1 involves confirmed evidence of adapted human existence without technical details, establishing the reality before addressing methodology. Distribution systems target specific dome population segments most psychologically prepared for adaptation concepts, primarily scientific personnel, social stability specialists, and educational sectors. The approach demonstrated sophisticated understanding of dome psychology and social structures, introducing adaptation knowledge through channels most capable of processing it without triggering widespread instability. It suggested the coalition had been preparing for eventual revelation far longer and more systematically than their defensive capabilities might have indicated. What happens now? Ash asked, the question encompassing both immediate tactical considerations and longer-term strategic implications. Transition begins, Chen replied with surprising directness. The domes can no longer maintain total information control regarding adaptation. Their leadership must choose between managed integration of this knowledge or increasingly difficult suppression against growing awareness. Most will likely choose controlled transition once the initial shock passes. She turned to Ash, Elias, and Riya specifically. Your role becomes increasingly valuable in this context. As former Dome citizens who've experienced both realities, you can help develop transition frameworks that address Dome population concerns without triggering the instability Dome leadership legitimately fears. It aligned with the middle path Vega had proposed earlier, neither returning to participate in continued deception nor abandoning Dome populations to chaotic discovery, but helping develop transition approaches that might allow both human populations to eventually reconnect without catastrophic disruption. The meeting continued into the evening, addressing practical implications of the accelerated revelation timeline. Coalition settlements would maintain defensive preparedness while establishing communication protocols with Dome leadership. Information release would continue in carefully calibrated phases, designed to allow Dome social structures time to adapt between revelations. Contingency plans would address potential hostile responses from Dome military resources. Throughout, Ash found himself processing his transformed role, from Eden 9 harvesters serving Dome interests to potential bridge between divided human populations. His training in resource assessment, risk management, and strategic planning transferred surprisingly well to this new context, though the ethical complexities far exceeded anything Eden 9's structured environment had prepared him for. When the formal meeting concluded, Administrator Chen requested to speak with Ash privately. They moved to a small adjacent room where the Central Coalition leader studied him with evident interest. Your tactical suggestions during the confrontation with Kane showed unusual insight, she observed, particularly regarding information leverage rather than direct opposition. Most dome-raised individuals struggle to think beyond the binary structures their society emphasizes. Harvester training, Ash explained simply. When standard protocols fail in wasteland conditions, we're taught to identify leverage points rather than force solutions. The wasteland rarely rewards direct confrontation. Chen nodded, seeming satisfied with his response. The transition period ahead will require individuals who understand both realities, Harvester Tanner. Those who can translate between dome certainties and wasteland adaptability. Your potential value in this context exceeds anything you might have contributed remaining within Eden 9's structures. The assessment was professionally delivered but carried personal implications Ash was still processing. His entire life had been structured around service to Eden 9, his identity bound to his role within Dome society. The past days had fundamentally challenged that identity, revealing the incomplete information upon which it had been constructed. I'm still determining what my role should be moving forward, he acknowledged. This transition wasn't planned or chosen with full understanding of the implications. Few transformative choices come with complete foreknowledge, Chen replied with unexpected philosophical depth. Adaptation itself, whether biological or social, requires embracing uncertainty while maintaining core purpose. The question isn't whether you fully understood this path before taking it, but whether you can integrate new understanding into evolved purpose moving forward. It articulated something Ash had been struggling to formulate. The difference between his dome-trained expectation of clearly defined roles and complete information versus the adapted community's comfort with evolution and uncertainty. Perhaps this represented the most fundamental adaptation required. Not just physiological changes to process wasteland toxicity, but psychological flexibility to navigate constantly changing realities rather than controlled environments. After Chen departed to coordinate with other coalition settlements regarding the evolving situation, Ash rejoined Elias and Riya in their transition quarters. The three former harvesters found themselves processing the day's developments with a mix of professional analysis and personal reflection. It's happening faster than anyone expected, Elias observed, his scientific mind already cataloging implications. The information barrier between domes and adapted communities is dissolving, whether either side fully prepared for it or not. Information constraints always fail eventually, Riya added, her communication expertise informing her perspective. Eden 9's control systems were impressive but fundamentally unsustainable once external alternatives developed sufficiently. The question was never if containment would fail, but when and how. Ash moved to the window, observing Nexus Point's evening operations. The adapted community continuing its functions despite the day's confrontation and transformed strategic situation. People moved through the settlement with purpose and connection, maintaining their community despite uncertainty about dome responses to the information now penetrating carefully constructed barriers. We need to decide our specific role in this transition, he said finally, turning back to his teammates. Central Command clearly values our potential contribution as translators between dome and adapted perspectives. But that contribution could take different forms depending on our choices now. The options before them had evolved alongside the strategic situation. Direct return to Eden 9 was no longer viable given the failed containment operation. But other possibilities had emerged. Roles within the Coalition's transition planning, positions with Central Command's dome communication initiatives, or even independent functions as bridges between the divided populations. I can't imagine returning to dome structures now, Elias admitted. Not just because of potential consequences, but because the research possibilities here. He gestured toward the settlement beyond their window. Adaptation technology represents the most significant scientific frontier since the collapse. I need to be part of understanding and advancing it. I'm thinking about the children, Riya said quietly. Both dome children raised with artificial limitations and adapted children born into wasteland challenges. They deserve futures that incorporate the strengths of both approaches. Dome security with adaptation possibility, structured support with individual agency. Their perspectives reflected their dome training. Elias's scientific focus, Riya's communication and social awareness, Ash's tactical and strategic orientation, while simultaneously transcending the limitations that training had imposed. They were becoming something new, neither fully dome nor fully adapted, but potentially valuable precisely because of that liminal position. "We helped build the bridge," Ash concluded, the strategy crystallizing as he spoke. "Not just between current populations, but between possible human futures. The domes preserved humanity through the worst of the collapse. Adaptation offers a path beyond perpetual containment. Both approaches contributed to human survival. Both deserve representation in whatever comes next." It wasn't a complete resolution to their uncertainty. Practical questions remained about specific roles, adaptation decisions, and personal paths forward. But it established a strategic framework for those decisions, commitment to facilitating transition rather than simply choosing sides in the emerging human divergence. As night settled over Nexus Point, Ash found himself contemplating the strange journey that had brought them to this juncture. What began as a routine harvesting mission had transformed into a fundamental reassessment of human possibilities post-collapse. The certainties upon which he had built his life had proven incomplete. Yet the core purpose, serving humanity's continuance, remained valid, even as its expression evolved. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as Dome leadership processed the containment failure and adapted communities. Implemented transition protocols. Information would continue flowing through barriers previously thought impenetrable, forcing both societies to reconsider foundational assumptions about human possibilities after the collapse. And somewhere in that transformative process, 3 former harvesters would find new purpose, not retrieving resources from the wasteland to sustain Dome existence, but harvesting understanding from both human realities to nurture whatever integrated future might emerge from their convergence. In the wasteland's harsh embrace, adaptation had always been necessary for survival. Now that necessity extended beyond biological modification to encompass social structures, governance models, and fundamental conceptions of human potential. The domes had preserved humanity through containment when extinction threatened. The adapted had expanded humanity through modification when containment became limitation. Perhaps the next evolution required neither approach exclusively, but their thoughtful integration, preservation and expansion in balance rather than opposition. And perhaps those who understood both realities would prove essential to achieving that integration without sacrificing either population's legitimate values in the process. It wasn't the future Ash had been trained to build as an Eden 9 harvester, but it might be the one humanity truly needed. Not perfect controlled environments or complete adaptive freedom, but conscious choice between complementary human possibilities depending on individual priorities and circumstances. Not Eden restored, not the wasteland conquered, but something new emerging from their convergence. A humanity adapted not just biologically, but philosophically to post-collapse reality, in all its complexity and potential. If you've been following Ash's journey and Beyond the Dome, please don't forget to like and subscribe for the final chapter. How do you think the domes will ultimately respond to the revelation about adaptation possibilities? Will Ash, Elias, and Riya undergo biological adaptation themselves? Share your predictions in the comments below.